A shivering bride stands in the grand foyer of Whitmore Abbey, her freedom traded for £50,000 of her father's gambling debt. She expects a monster. She expects a lifetime of cruel servitude. What she doesn't expect is the sound of her own contract turning to ash. In the autumn of 1888, the Harrington family name was worth less than the mud lining the streets of London's East End. Charles Harrington, a once respected shipping magnate, had spent the better part of a decade gambling away his fortune, his ships, and ultimately his honor. He sat in his cavernous, freezing study in Mayfair, staring at a ledger that spelled his absolute ruin. He owed massive sums to the worst kinds of men, but none more terrifying than Alistair Dumont, a vicious baron known for destroying families for sport. But Charles did not surrender his daughter to Dumont. Instead, in a desperate, cowardly pivot, he sold her to the only man in England powerful enough to make Dumont back down, Nathaniel Rutherford, the Duke of Whitmore. Known across polite society as the Ice Duke, Nathaniel was a man carved from marble and shadow. He possessed vast coal mines in the north, a fleet of merchant vessels, and a reputation that made grown men tremble. He was famously unmarried, notoriously ruthless, and completely devoid of sentiment. The rumors whispered in drawing rooms painted him as a tyrant who had once bankrupted the Earl of Croydon simply because the man had insulted a maid. When 20-year-old Madeline Harrington was summoned to her father's study, she expected to hear they were being evicted. She did not expect to see her father weeping into his hands, sliding a heavy parchment contract across the mahogany desk. £50,000, Madeline. Charles choked out, refusing to meet her eyes. He has cleared the debt. All of it. But the carriage arrives at dawn. You are to be his ward. His property until the debt is worked off. And we both know you will never work it off. Madeline felt the air rush from her lungs. She stared at the signature at the bottom of the page, Nathaniel Rutherford, Duke of Whitmore. It was a death sentence. She was being traded like a prized mare to a man who possessed no heart. The next morning, an unmarked black carriage, drawn by 4 massive Frisian horses, waited in the freezing rain. Madeline stepped inside with nothing but a single trunk of modest dresses. She didn't cry. She had spent her entire life managing her father's failures. This was simply the final devastating payment. The journey to Whitmore Abbey in Yorkshire took 2 grueling days. When the carriage finally passed through the towering wrought-iron gates, Madeline pressed her face to the glass. The abbey was a sprawling Gothic masterpiece of dark stone ivy and imposing turrets silhouetted against a bruising grey sky. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress designed to keep the world out or prisoners in. She was greeted at the heavy oak doors not by the Duke, but by his stern, grey-haired housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins. "Welcome to Whitmore Abbey, Miss Harrington," the older woman said, her voice clipped, but not unkind. "His Grace is currently in his study. You are to be shown to your rooms. Dinner is at 8. You are expected to attend." Madeline's room was a shock. She had anticipated a barren, servant-like cell. Instead, she was led into a sprawling suite, draped in rich emerald velvet and gold silk. A fire roared in the hearth, and a massive canopy bed dominated the space. It was a gilded cage, beautiful, but terrifying in its implications. Why would a cruel creditor put his captive in the master wing? At exactly 8 o'clock, Madeline descended the grand sweeping staircase. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The dining room was vast, lit by dozens of flickering candles that cast long shadows against the walls. At the head of the table stood Nathaniel Rutherford. He was breathtakingly imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in dark evening wear with raven-black hair and eyes the color of a winter storm. When he looked at her, Madeline felt an involuntary shiver race down her spine. His gaze was heavy, calculating, and entirely unreadable. "Miss Harrington." His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that commanded the room. He did not step forward to kiss her hand. He did not offer a warm smile. He simply gestured to the chair to his right. "Sit." The meal was an agonizing exercise in silence. Course after course was served by invisible footmen. Finally unable to bear the suffocating tension, Madeline dropped her silver fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "Why am I here, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice trembling but defiant. "You have bought me. You have paid my father's debts. Am I to be a servant, a prisoner, or something far worse?" Nathaniel slowly set down his wine's glass. He looked at her with an expression so intensely guarded, it felt physical. "You are here, Miss Harrington, because your father is a reckless fool who would have seen you destroyed," Nathaniel replied coldly. "You will live in this house. You will want for nothing. You will not leave the grounds without my explicit permission, and you will not contact your father. Those are the terms." "For how long?" she challenged, gripping the edge of the table. "Until I say otherwise," he said softly, standing up from the table. "Good night, Madeline." He left her sitting alone in the cavernous room, the echo of her own name on his lips, sending a confusing, terrifying warmth pooling in her chest. Weeks bled into a cold Yorkshire winter. Madeline's life at Whitmore Abbey was a paradox of ultimate luxury and utter isolation. She had access to a library that rivaled the Royal Archives, sprawling greenhouses filled with exotic blooms, and a wardrobe of exquisite gowns tailored to her exact measurements, ordered by the Duke, without him ever asking her size. Yet she was utterly alone. Nathaniel was a phantom in his own home. He left before dawn to manage his estates and returned long after dark. When they did interact, usually over dinner, he was polite, distant, and infuriatingly formal. He asked about her reading, inquired about the warmth of her rooms, but deflected any questions about his own life or the true nature of their arrangement. Madeline realized quickly that Nathaniel was not the monster society painted him to be. She observed him from the library windows. She saw him speak to his stable hands with quiet respect. She watched him carry a lame hound into the kitchens, demanding the cook prepare broth for the animal. There was a profound, aching loneliness in him that mirrored her own. The fragile peace shattered in late November. A violent snowstorm had trapped the household indoors. Madeline had retreated to the library to read, wrapped in a thick cashmere shawl. Around midnight, the heavy oak doors slammed open, revealing Nathaniel. He was drenched, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his greatcoat heavy with melting snow. He looked furious, a terrifying wildness in his grey eyes. Behind him stepped a man who made Madeline's blood run cold, Alistair Dumont. "It seems the roads are entirely impassable, Whitmore." Dumont sneered, shaking off his wet cloak. "I appreciate your hospitality, though I must admit I am surprised to see this lovely creature in your keeping." Dumont's leering eyes locked onto Madeline. She shrank back against the leather armchair. She knew Dumont. He was the man her father had originally owed the money to, the man who had looked at her with sickening hunger during her father's lowest moments. "Miss Harrington is my ward, Dumont," Nathaniel said, his voice dropping to a deadly gravelly whisper. "You will address her with respect, or you will find yourself walking back to London in the blizzard." Dumont laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Your ward." "Come now, Nathaniel. We are men of the world. Charles Harrington offered her to me first to clear his ledger. You simply outbid me. A clever maneuver taking the prize right out from under me. I suppose the Ice Duke has appetites after all." The silence that followed was suffocating. Madeline felt her stomach plummet. Outbid Nathaniel hadn't just paid her father's debt. He had actively outmaneuvered Dumont to acquire her. The betrayal stung like a physical blow. She wasn't a rescued bird. She was a trophy, won in a high-stakes auction between monsters. Before Madeline could flee the room, Nathaniel moved. It happened so fast it was a blur. He crossed the library in 3 massive strides, grabbing Dumont by the lapels of his sodden coat and slamming him against the mahogany bookshelves. Books tumbled to the floor with a crash. "Listen to me very carefully, Alistair." Nathaniel hissed his face inches from the terrified barons. "If you ever speak of her in that manner again, if you ever look at her again, I will not just bankrupt you. I will erase your entire bloodline from the history of this country. You will sleep in the stables tonight with the beasts, and you will leave at first light." Nathaniel threw Dumont to the floor. The baron scrambled away, his arrogant sneer replaced by genuine terror, fleeing the library without a word. Nathaniel stood breathing heavily, his back to Madeline. The firelight cast long, monstrous shadows around him. "So it's true," Madeline whispered, her voice cracking. Tears she refused to shed burned her throat. "My father offered me to him. And you bought me just to win a game against a rival." Nathaniel slowly turned around. The fury in his eyes had vanished, replaced by an expression of profound, agonizing desperation. He looked completely shattered. "A game." He repeated, his voice barely a rasp. He closed the distance between them, stopping just a foot away, hovering over her, with a magnetic, devastating intensity. "Do you think I care about Alistair Dumont? Do you think I give a damn about your father's miserable ledgers?" Madeline stared up at him, her heart thrashing. "Then why did you pay £50,000 for a woman you do not even speak to?" Nathaniel closed his eyes, a muscle feathering in his jaw. When he opened them, the cold exterior of the Ice Duke was entirely gone. "Because I was at the Richmond Gala 4 years ago," he breathed, staring down at her lips. "Because you wore a dress the color of midnight, and you laughed at a terrible joke made by a clumsy footman instead of scolding him. Because I have spent 4 years watching your father slowly drag you toward the abyss, and when I learned he was going to sell you to Dumont, I would have burned all of London to the ground to prevent it." Madeline gasped, the revelation hitting her like a tidal wave. He hadn't bought her to own her. He had bought her to save her. "The contract," Nathaniel said, stepping back abruptly, as if tearing himself away from a powerful current. "I am going to my study. Follow me." The walk to the Duke's study felt like a march to the executioner's block, yet Madeline's veins hummed with an electric, confusing heat. Nathaniel's confession echoed in her ears. He had seen her. He had remembered her. He had saved her. Nathaniel's study was a reflection of the man himself, orderly, dark, and overwhelmingly intense. Heavy velvet drapes shut out the raging blizzard, and a massive hearth dominated the far wall, where a fierce fire crackled and spat. The room smelled of sandalwood old vellum, and the crisp, lingering scent of winter air that clung to Nathaniel's coat. He strode past his grand mahogany desk and unlocked a heavy iron safe embedded in the stone wall. His movements were jagged, stripped of his usual aristocratic grace. From the safe, he withdrew a thick roll of parchment, sealed with red wax, the very document that had bound Madeline's life to his. "Do you know why I did not simply give your father the money?" Nathaniel asked, his back still turned to her. He stared down at the parchment in his hands. "Do you know why I demanded a wardship contract dragging you away from London to this god-forsaken fortress? Because if you had given him the money, he would have gambled it away again." Madeline replied softly, her voice steadying. "He would have found another debt and another Dumont." Nathaniel turned his storm-grey eyes, locking onto hers. "Yes, but it was worse than that. Your father did not just owe Alistair Dumont money. He had blindly signed a promissory note that offered his bloodline as collateral. It is an archaic, barbaric piece of legislation, but legally binding in the hands of a ruthless solicitor. If I had simply paid the debt, Dumont's secondary lien would have activated the moment your father stumbled into his next financial ruin. Dumont would have owned you. Madeline felt the blood drain from her face. She reached out, gripping the back of a leather wingback chair for support. He was going to take me regardless. I could not allow that. Nathaniel stepped closer, his imposing frame casting a long shadow across the Persian rug. So I employed the only legal maneuver that superseded a blood collateral lien. I purchased your wardship for an astronomical sum and brought you where Dumont could never reach you. Here, with me. He looked down at the heavy contract. His knuckles were white. I wanted to keep you safe, Nathaniel whispered, the agonizing vulnerability in his voice shattering the last remnants of the Ice Duke. But I have watched you these past weeks. I have seen you staring out the windows, looking at the horizon like a caged bird. I saved you from Dumont's prison only to lock you inside my own. I thought I could bear your hatred, so long as you were breathing and safe. But I find I cannot. Before Madeline could process the profound weight of his words, Nathaniel walked directly to the roaring fireplace. Your Grace, what are you doing? She gasped. Releasing you, he stated firmly. With a swift, decisive motion, Nathaniel tossed the £50,000 contract straight into the flames. Madeline shrieked, lunging forward, but Nathaniel caught her by the waist, pulling her back against his chest so she wouldn't burn her hands. They both stood frozen, watching as the thick parchment curled, blackened, and ignited into brilliant orange flames. The wax seals melted into a puddle of crimson before vanishing into ash. £50,000, her father's debt, her bondage, all of it reduced to nothing but smoke rising up the chimney. Nathaniel, she breathed, using his Christian name for the very first time. She twisted in his arms to face him. His chest heaved against hers, his eyes dark and dilated. You are free, Madeline. He murmured, his hands gently framing her face. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, his touch reverent and trembling. Tomorrow I will arrange an endowment in your name. You may go to Paris, to Rome, anywhere your heart desires. You will never have to look at another ledger, and you will never have to look at me again. Madeline stared up at the man society called a monster. She saw the exhaustion etched into his features, the deep, abiding loneliness that he had carried for years, all to protect a woman who had despised him. What if I do not want to go to Paris? She asked, her voice dropping to a husky whisper. Nathaniel's breath hitched. Madeline, what if my heart does not desire Rome? She stepped closer, closing the final inch between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. She tilted her chin up. What if I wished to stay in Yorkshire with a man who would burn a fortune just to see me fly? A low groan tore from Nathaniel's throat. The restraint he had practiced for weeks finally snapped. His hands tangled in her dark hair, and he crushed his mouth to hers. The kiss was an explosion of suppressed longing. It was desperate, fierce, and intoxicating. Madeline melted against him, her hands wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. All the terror and confusion of the past month vanished, replaced by a searing, undeniable truth. She did not belong to him because of a contract. She belonged to him because he was the only man who had ever truly seen her. They stayed in the study until dawn broke, talking in hushed whispers by the dying embers of the fire, mapping out a future that belonged entirely to them. But outside the impenetrable walls of Whitmore Abbey, the world was preparing to strike back. The heavy thud of the brass knocker echoing through the grand foyer shattered the morning's peace. Madeline and Nathaniel had just descended the staircase, her arm securely looped through his when Mrs. Higgins opened the massive oak doors. A blast of freezing air swept into the hall, carrying with it a contingent of unwelcome guests. Alistair Dumont stood in the centre of the foyer, a triumphant, malicious sneer twisting his features. Flanking him were 4 armed constables from the local magistrate's office and a sharp-featured man in a severe black suit. Solicitor Archibald Montgomery, a man renowned in London for bending the law to favour the highest bidder. "What is the meaning of this, Dumont?" Nathaniel's voice cracked through the hall like a whip. The warmth in his eyes vanished, instantly replaced by the terrifying glacial stare of the Duke of Whitmore. Dumont stepped forward, brushing snow from his lapels. "A tragedy, Whitmore. A terrible, unforeseen tragedy. It brings me no pleasure to inform you that Charles Harrington was found dead in a London alleyway 3 nights ago." Madeline gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Nathaniel's arm tightened protectively around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. Even though her father had betrayed her, the finality of his death struck her like a physical blow. Furthermore, Dumont continued, his eyes gleaming with wicked delight as they locked onto Madeline. With Harrington's demise, his estate and all his unsettled affairs transfer to his primary creditor, which as of yesterday morning is me. I have purchased his remaining debts from the Crown. Miss Harrington is my ward. Nathaniel stated, his voice a lethal low rumble. Her debts were cleared when I purchased the contract. Solicitor Archibald Montgomery stepped forward, unrolling an official royal writ. "That would be true, Your Grace, provided you can produce the physical contract. Lord Dumont alleges that the contract was signed under duress and illegal coercion. If you cannot produce the document for the magistrate's inspection to verify the seals and signatures, the wardship is rendered utterly void." Madeline's blood turned to ice. The contract. Nathaniel had burned it. He had burned it to set her free, and in doing so had destroyed the very shield that kept Dumont at bay. "Produce the document, Whitmore." Dumont sneered, stepping closer. "Or hand over my property. If you resist, the constables have orders from the High Magistrate to arrest you for the kidnapping and unlawful detention of a young woman." Nathaniel did not flinch. He did not look at the constables. He simply stared at Dumont with a terrifying calm. "You will have to kill me before you lay a single finger on her, Alistair." The constables shifted nervously, their hands resting on their truncheons. Arresting a duke was a dangerous game. Engaging in violence with one known for his ruthlessness was a death wish. "Arrest him!" Dumont shrieked, his composure slipping. "He has no contract. He has no legal right to her." "Wait!" Madeline's voice rang out, clear and commanding. She stepped out from Nathaniel's protective embrace, ignoring his warning hiss. Her mind raced, clicking through years of memories, years of sitting in her father's freezing study, balancing ledgers and organizing his chaotic files. "Mr. Montgomery," Madeline said, turning to the solicitor. Her voice did not shake. "You state that Lord Dumont is my father's primary creditor, having purchased his debts. But what if Lord Dumont owes the Crown far more than my father ever did?" Dumont scoffed. "What is this nonsense? The grief has driven the girl mad." "My father was a foolish man, but he was meticulous with his shipping manifests." Madeline continued, her eyes narrowing as she stared Dumont down. "Before I was brought to Yorkshire, I managed his accounts. I packed a specific ledger in my trunk, the ledger for the Star of the East, a merchant vessel my father chartered 2 years ago." Dumont's face suddenly lost its colour. The triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by genuine pale terror. "I remember thinking it was odd," Madeline said, taking a slow step toward the trembling Baron. "The cargo was listed as textiles, but the taxation weight was wrong. And the signature authorizing the bypass of the Royal Customs House in Bristol was yours, Lord Dumont. You weren't just loaning my father money. You were using his failing shipping lines to smuggle untaxed opium into the country, a crime against the crown. She is lying, Dumont shouted, backing away toward the door. She has no proof. Mrs. Higgins. Madeline called out, not breaking eye contact with Dumont. Yes, miss, the housekeeper replied from the shadows. In my chambers at the very bottom of my leather trunk, there is a false lining. Beneath it you will find a red leather ledger. Please fetch it for Solicitor Montgomery to examine. At once, miss. Dumont panicked. He spun on his heel and lunged for the door, but Nathaniel was faster. With terrifying speed, the Duke crossed the foyer and grabbed Dumont by the scruff of his coat, hurling him violently onto the marble floor. I believe you are staying for tea, Alistair, Nathaniel said, standing over the cowering man. He looked to the constables, who were staring in shock. It seems your warrant is misdirected, gentlemen. Smuggling opium is a treasonous offence. I suggest you take this man into custody before I decide to administer justice myself. Solicitor Montgomery cleared his throat, suddenly looking incredibly uncomfortable. If the young lady's claims are verified by the ledger, Lord Dumont's assets will be seized by the Crown. His purchase of the Harrington debt will be nullified. Then I suggest you sit in the drawing room and read the ledger carefully, Mr. Montgomery, Nathaniel commanded. Within the hour, Dumont was dragged out of Whitmore Abbey in irons, shouting obscenities into the howling wind. Montgomery departed shortly after bowing deeply to the Duke and apologizing profusely for the unfortunate misunderstanding, clutching the red ledger that would seal Dumont's doom in London. Silence fell over the grand foyer once more. The heavy oak doors were bolted shut against the winter chill. Nathaniel turned to Madeline. The terrifying exterior of the Ice Duke had melted away entirely, leaving only the man who had loved her from afar for 4 agonizing years. You are a remarkably dangerous woman, Madeline Harrington, Nathaniel said, a slow, breathtaking smile spreading across his handsome face. I had an excellent teacher in ruthlessness, Your Grace, she replied, a teasing spark in her eyes. Nathaniel walked toward her, taking her hands in his. He dropped slowly to one knee on the cold marble floor. Madeline's breath caught in her throat. The contract is ash, Nathaniel said, looking up at her with an adoration so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Your debts are gone. Your enemies are ruined. You are entirely free to walk out those doors and never return. He reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew a simple, stunning ring, a massive, flawless sapphire surrounded by diamonds. But if you would do me the profound honor of staying, Nathaniel murmured, his voice thick with emotion, I vow to spend every day of my life proving that I am worthy of you, not as your guardian, not as your creditor, but as your husband. Will you marry me, Madeline? Madeline looked down at the man who had bought her to save her, who had burned a fortune to free her, and who had finally given her a home. Yes, she whispered, pulling him up from his knee and crashing her lips against his. Yes, Nathaniel, 1,000 times yes. The Ice Duke of Whitmore had finally melted, and in his place stood a man who would burn the world down to keep his Duchess warm. Did Madeline and Nathaniel's defiance against all odds steal your heart? Love truly triumphed over greed in this dramatic tale of the Ice Duke and his brilliant bride. If you were captivated by this historical romance, full of twists, passion, and justice, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this incredible story with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more sweeping, emotional storytelling. See you in the next video.